Good afternoon again. My name is Jeanette Williams, and I would like to welcome you to a conversation with Christopher Durkin, County Clerk of Essex County, New Jersey. This event is sponsored by the League of Women Voters, Montclair area, and I'd like to also thank TV 34 for recording our event. Let me also reach out to two special visitors who are with us, Mayor Robert Jackson of Montclair, New Jersey, and also Linda Wanick, Montclair's town clerks, Montclair Township Clerk, who is here also. Thank you. As you may or may not know, the League of Women Voters was established in 1920 after winning the right to vote for women. It became not only the nation's most effective grassroots organization, but also one of the nation's most respected community-based organizations. In addition to our work in the elections area, the League of Volunteers work on issues of local importance, from education to land use and housing. We do not support or oppose any candidates for office or political parties. Let me repeat, we do not support or oppose any candidates for office or political parties. We want everyone to vote so that our elected leaders represent our entire community. We are a voice for all, working to connect people directly with government. We provide and work from facts. We educate, we advocate for change. As an organization protecting the right to vote against threats and ensuring that every vote is counted by fighting for and implementing voting systems that are free, fair, and accessible, we invited Mr. Durkin to address these issues with us. You will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of our dialogue. Did you know Christopher J. Durkin currently is serving his third term? He was first elected to the office of Essex County Clerk in November 2005 and officially sworn into office on January 1st, 2006. Prior to taking office, Mr. Durkin served as the Director of Human Resources for the County of Essex. In 2002, he was elected to the office of Second Vice Chair of the Essex County Democratic Party under United States Congressman Donald M. Payne. A graduate of Rutgers University, New Jersey, where he majored in political science, Mr. Durkin began his career in public service at the North Ward Cultural Center in Newark, New Jersey, where he taught math and English and served as a job placement counselor officer to people going from welfare to work. Mr. Durkin continued his pursuit of educational excellence, graduating from the Essex County Police Academy and then becoming a detective with the Essex County Sheriff's Office. In 2001, Mr. Durkin earned his master's degree in Human Resources, Training and Development from Seton Hall University. He has also attended the prestigious Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University. The Blaustein School serves as one of the nation's key centers for the theory and practice of planning and public scholarship analysis. And now, let's begin our thought-provoking conversation with Mr. Christopher J. Durkin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Good afternoon. I want to thank Doris Shapiro, the president of Montclair League of Women Voters, for inviting me here today to speak with you. Doris Shapiro, right? Not president, but gave you a promotion. Isn't that nice? Okay. And I want to thank you all for coming out. You are the lifeblood of our democracy, being that you are trying to increase voter turnout. We will rise or fall as a democracy based on participation. And it is so important. I go to schools all the time and I tell the children in the schools, I do not consider you an American until you vote. Now, that might seem a little harsh, but I believe that. It's the great equalizer. It brings us as one when we walk to our voting booths and we walk in without fear and we get a chance to cast our vote and our decision on the direction of our municipality, our town, our county, state, or federal government. It's so important. And when we see this, just as I see your mayor here, who I think is the greatest. I love my work with him in the county, and he does such a great job there and also in the town. What we understand is that, and again, do I want someone to run against me? Yes, I do, because I feel that the more people that are engaged, not just in the voting process, but actually running for office, the better candidates, the better product we will have representing us. Competition is good when it comes to democracy. And I tell, when I go to, schools, I just don't tell them to vote in every election. I tell them to run for office. That's what we need. We need more candidates running for office so that people actually have to test their own skills and become better and do more and be more. I went through an election which really changed my life. It was the most important time in my public life was 2008 general election, presidential election. And not because it was an historic election with Barack Obama running, but because of Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane Sandy hit New Jersey 6 days before the election. We didn't know if we were going to have the election. It devastated New Jersey, as you know. I mean, more than 90% of the power was out. Our polling sites had no power. Trying to scramble around to get them back on. People didn't know, but it was a presidential election, so you couldn't postpone it because it all happens at once, one day. So scrambling over those 6 days, to make sure the power was on the polling sites, and it was amazing that people thirsted to vote. So it was frustrating on one hand, but it was inspirational because people thirsted to have their voices heard. We had thousands of people come to the Hall of Records to cast their vote in person. We had Derek Jeter's parents online for 3 hours. I mean, people from Montclair, newscasters, people just wanted to have their voices heard. And what's amazing is 2012. I was thinking about 2008. 2008's turnout was the biggest turnout in Essex County since 1960. 2012's turnout with Hurricane Sandy was 10,000 votes less than 2008, which was a beautiful day. So to me, that said it all about people wanting to have their voice heard. And they did, the power was out. We know the gas lines. It was really a trying time for a lot of people. And for them to prioritize voting was so important to me. And one quick story, it was a couple days before the election, got a call from a young woman whose mother was in the hospital. And she was panicking because her mother was not going to get a chance to vote. And so I knew how important it was just by listening to this woman. So I went to the hospital to bring a vote-by-mail ballot. And the woman was in her 90s, and she told me the story that when women received the right to vote in 1920, she was a young child, and she traveled with her mother and her grandmother to witness them cast their first vote. And she knew just how important it was, and she never missed a vote in her whole life. And she had tears in her eyes because, not just because of the importance of her getting a chance to voice her opinion in an historic election, but also knowing how impactful she was on her daughter. Her daughter realized the importance of it, to have her mother's voice be heard in that election. It was just so inspirational to me. Going back in time, I think about the history of this country, 240 years. At the inception of this country, the only people that could vote, you had to be a white, male, Protestant landowner, right? Those four things. That was the criteria. Then with our Constitution, they threw out religion and being a landowner. But it was another 90 years, right, to 1870 for the 15th Amendment, where race was no longer a prerequisite to voting, but women could still not vote. So it was white men and black men who could vote. And then 50 years after that, in 1920, I think about the inception of our country. It took 2 lifetimes for a black male to acquire the right to vote, and then 3 lifetimes from the inception of our country for women to gain the right to vote. So it's amazing where we've come. And then you go to 1965 and the Civil Rights Act, which tried to take away the hurdles put in front of minorities in voting. And still to this day, we fight for those hurdles to be taken away, where states are trying to, have identification in order to vote. Sometimes they want you to pay for it. And also another thing I wanted to explain, that they had a freeholder, Brendan Gill, who obviously represents Montclair. He came up with an interesting point a few years back with our vote by mail ballots, because before he brought it up, we were actually sending a vote by mail ballot out to a voter. They would have to put a stamp on the ballot, send it back. So in essence, it was a poll tax, right? So we're offering that option to vote, and then we're saying we're charging you to vote. So we now put postage on the return ballots so that there is no poll tax for voters. In 2000, I'm just going to go through some things that I think are very important as far as voting in New Jersey and security, and then we'll go to a Q&A. In 2000, with the election of George Bush and Al Gore, and we knew how many issues came up because the election was close. And government is also often reactionary, right? They don't foresee or plan. They just react to circumstances we have. And in 2000, with the voting methods, we had issues with butterfly ballots, with different counting methods. And because of that, George Bush proposed the Help America Vote Act, HAVA. And what that said was, we need to increase our security for voter registration, and we also need to increase our security for voting methods and machines. But what they did was they said, we're going to give the decisions of what voting machines a county can use to each Secretary of State. So each Secretary of State would certify election machines, and then you could only use one of those certified machines. So Essex was the last county in New Jersey to buy the new voting machines. 19 of the 21 counties have the same machine, Sequoia AVC voting machine, which does not have a paper trail, which is very, it's on the minds of everyone now that that's what's needed, a paper trail. But in 2006, Montclair was the strong municipality protesting against a machine without a paper trail. And we bought those machines because the 6 voting machines that were certified by the Secretary of State, none of them had a paper trail anyway. So, we could have done, I won't say that, we could have done straight paper, which we didn't do, which would run through optical scanners and be counted. But we went with these AVC electronic voting machines, and we are now coming up to a point next year where things are going to happen fast. I assume there's going to be a new governor and a Democratic governor. I assume that. And, by the polls, you just left him, right? So did I. I was over there also. And with the next governor, if it is Phil Murphy, there will be a lot of movement with elections. There will be a Democracy Act that will be passed that was put up a couple years ago, and Nia Gill is one of the sponsors, Senator Gill, and that would have 15 days of early voting. That would include online voter registration as part of it. Those 15 days of early voting would be by paper. And also, next year, I would foresee new voting machines coming in with paper trails. Probably would be put in place for 2019. And we are one of only 5 states in the country that still does not have paper trails on our voting machines. So what happens is you can check with the number of people who voted by the poll book, by how they signed into the poll book. And then it's a computer where there's a cartridge in the back of the machine which tallies the votes. So that's the matchup. You're matching up the number of votes on the cartridge, the computer cartridge, with the number of people who signed in the poll book. It would give you a third check with a paper receipt. And this is what most likely the machine will look like. It'll be a full-face ballot. On the side of the machine, it will have a paper printout of what you chose for your ballot. And then when you verify your vote, it cuts off that piece of paper and falls into a drop box, which circulates those votes so that you can't see the top. The person who on the last vote would be the last person who voted. You wouldn't be able to see who voted when. And then you'd be able to have a third check in case there was a recount or in case there was any issues with the machine. You could then have that backup to see the paper results for each vote for that machine. So I'm trying to think of what other issues. Yes, please.
Voter fraud? I mean, if you would you want to stand back on those lines for hours to vote again? It doesn't make sense. None of it does. I mean, it never did to me.
Explain what you're.
I'm saying to talk about voter fraud.
Yes.
You see the long lines. You mean someone's going to get off that line and go somewhere else and vote on another law? It doesn't make sense. People are not like that.
Right. It's a very minuscule issue, and I understand it's politics. So people bring that up as far as politics, and so I would say this: if to really make an impact, voter fraud would have to be organized, and if it's organized, it would be found out in a day. So it's a minuscule issue. It's all about voter suppression, pretty much. I would say, venture to say. I'd also like to cover the. I know Doris talked about when we spoke on the phone about security, election security, and what happened in 2016 with the hacking of different statewide voter registration systems. They just came out saying that 21 state systems were hacked into. And here's the issue. So now, even if you say that they were not able to hack into voting machines, and the thing about the voting machines is there's not a central network for our voting machines. Each voting machine is individually programmed. So you would have to hack into each individual machine to change that. Yes, sir. To change the vote for that machine.
They're all stored in one central location.
Yes, they are. That's it. They're stored in one warehouse.
Prior to that, they come from the manufacturer with the software preloaded.
Yes. Yes.
And
correct.
Go ahead.
And I was going to say that before each election, there's a test of each voting machine that the person you're voting for is the person that's being registered by the machine. So each machine gets tested to verify that it's programmed correctly for each office.
And they're all running on Windows software.
Yes. And so with the hacking of the election, the scariest part about it was when you go into our voter registration system, it's a statewide system. What they could have done was the night before you're to cut the tape. So how we do it is 2 weeks before Election Day, you cut the tape. It's called cutting the tape of the registered voters in your system to create the poll books that you see when you walk into the voting booth and you sign the book. Those poll books are created off the cutting of a poll book tape from our election system. If right before you cut that tape, they deleted 50,000 voters or 100,000 voters, or they changed the names of 100,000 voters, that would cause major chaos on Election Day. Can you imagine if they did that? And it was, let's say it was even the same amount of voters. Like I said, they just changed the names to all different names, and the board workers couldn't verify that that person who they were saying they were. It would just cause major. You had a question? I'm sorry.
I buy things online, as we all do, with a credit card, over the phone, as I'm driving down the road. Why can't we just get to a system where we get rid of these machines? Because how many machines do we have in Little New Jersey? You got one in each precinct, right?
Yes, at least.
So
one
it probably costs us $1 billion to run an election, for God's sake.
No, not that much.
So, how many machines do we have?
We have 700 machines. We have 551 districts. Yes.
Right. So why can't we just get to a system where we do everything online? You go online. I got a Social Security number. If I can buy stuff online and it's safe, why can't I vote online? If that's
I would say
you could say equal. You could say whatever you want, but when you talk about our system, it's an 18th century system. That's what it is.
Well, I would say this. I mean, look at Equifax, right? Look what's happening with the hacking of, and can someone else go in, and you'll combat this, but can someone else use someone else's Social Security number to vote? Also, on top of that, I think in the future, I don't know when, but in the future, you're going to have online voting, but I think it's a far way off because the security, first of all, and then I think people would have issues with people having access to computers and that ability to vote. I mean, I'm not arguing with them. I'm actually saying that I think there's a hindrance to that coming to fruition in the short term. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. First of all, thanks a lot for the really good accommodations you made after the storm. I voted downtown, and you guys handled it beautifully. It's a
Thank you.
Testament. So Sequoia was supposed to have furnished us the voter-verified paper record attachment to our voting machines by 2008, I believe, at their expense, and then used some loophole in Essex County's contract to say they were actually technically incapable of producing the thing that they had contractually promised to do. The state legislation then moved to a piece where if federal monies were not provided to make that retrofit, it didn't have to happen. It's my understanding. So how is that going to happen now? And are you still committed to moving forward with the Sequoia machines we have, or something different?
Well, I'm not committed to anything. I'd be committed to a paper trail. I would say that what happened there, that was a Senator Nia Gill bill that she demanded a paper trail for the Sequoia voting machines. Now, the Sequoia voting machines, it was on old technology, so they were afraid that by retrofitting these machines with new technology, they weren't going to be capable of managing a presidential election. They thought in a standard election, the bag that they were going to retrofit the machine with the paper would fall into the bag, would be good enough for an election for 250 people or 200 people. But in a presidential election, they thought that in the middle of the day, the bag would have to be changed and the board workers would have to get involved in changing out a bag of this retrofitted machine. They weren't sure if the technology would work, if it would, break down in the middle of the day. And the fear of that, was the issue and why it was stopped. And I agree, Sequoia should have come through. They should have provided new technology where replacing the machines. Obviously, we know the machines cost quite a bit of money. We were fortunate in 2006 that the state funded a lot of that because state mandates, state pay. They said you have to use these machines. So we did that, and they helped us out a lot with the funding. But I don't think it would have worked out well to retrofit the old technology with that machine, and I think it would have been some more breakdowns than they already are. And so I think that was the issue. Well, going forward, like I said, next year is a huge year because of the legislature. You'll have again, I'm saying that I'm thinking that it's going to be a Democratic governor, Democratic Senate and Assembly, and it's going to move so fast with the Democracy Act, with changes in access to voting, with demanding new voting machines, with, I think, just like Virginia did, I think I mentioned Virginia just decertified any machine that does not have a paper trail. So Virginia just did that a few days ago. So I think the same thing's going to happen in New Jersey. I would assume Sheila Oliver would most likely be Secretary of State as Lieutenant Governor, so she'll be in charge of our elections in New Jersey come January. So I think it's going to move so fast and rapid, and just a matter of staying on the legislature and the governor to make sure it happens fast. Yes.
Was New Jersey notified by Homeland Security that we'd been breached, attempted breached, our registration lists or our voting systems?
Yeah, not as of yet. I mean, you read the article where they were in the midst of contacting all the states, and I saw there was at least, they listed about 12 states that were compromised. Out of the 21, they said 21 states were compromised. They were going to notify all 50 to tell them whether or not they were, compromised or not, but New Jersey did not hear if New Jersey was one of them.
To go back to the list of registered voters, you said that that's a statewide list and that it could be changed. What protections do we have against that being hacked?
Well, that's another great question. Homeland Security is taking over as far as the security of elections, and they've deemed it a vital to our national security, the electoral process. I mean, just like a nuclear plant. So they are getting involved in both the security of our statewide systems and also the security of our voting machine and the process of how they're managed or secured. So really, we're going to be overseen by Homeland Security. And Jay Johnson was the one who, in early January of this year, before President Trump took over, deemed it a national security issue. And so there's going to be many layers of security directed by Homeland Security for each state to follow through on.
How often are the voter rolls in New Jersey cleaned up for people that have moved out of state or passed away?
Great question. So I'm going to backtrack a little. Part of HAVA, Help America Vote Act, after the 2000 presidential election, said that what you need to do is you need to provide with your voter registration, you see the voter registration forms, you need to provide your last 4 digits of your social security number or your driver's license number going forward. Now, if you were previously registered to vote, you didn't need to do that. But any new registered voters needed to provide that information. It goes through our statewide system, our DMV, our Social Security, to verify that who you say you are, you are. And then it puts you in the book. If you do not provide your Social Security number or your last 4 digits of your social or the driver's license number, then you are in the poll book. It says needs to show ID, and there's 12 different IDs, student ID, and that it has your address matched up with your name, and then from then on you don't have to show ID. It's just that one time. Go ahead, and then I'll finish up. Yes, I want to talk about that, and then I want to finish this. Okay. I want to finish this answer, and I'll tell you. I think I know where you're going. So, so what happens is, so that's verifying who they are. Now, on top of that, Social Security, if someone is deceased, Social Security is supposed to notify each county registration office that this person is deceased. Please take them out of the voter rolls. I'm not sure how good that process is working. On top of that, I'll give you another issue with the voter rolls, and I think you're going to talk about what you're going to say about your 2 children. In order for someone to come off the voter rolls, what has to happen is sample ballots are delivered to each voter before every election. If that sample ballot is returned undeliverable back to the county, you then become an inactive voter, okay? And if you go to the polls and vote, you then go back to active within 2 federal elections. If you're inactive and you miss 2 federal elections, you're then removed from the polls. But if your children move from your home and you keep accepting the sample ballots into your house and throwing them in the garbage, they'll never come off the rolls. Because there's no way, we're just assuming that they just don't want to vote, but they still live there because the sample ballot is being delivered and taken into the House and not being returned to us as undeliverable, for us to start the process of removing them from the voter rolls.
Theoretically, my son, who lives in New York City,
Yes.
and so he registered to vote there. He had been registered here. He theoretically could vote twice in one day, right? Because
Theoretically.
he didn't take. I didn't return his ballot because I didn't know what it. So I think I just throw it away. I recycle it. So who do I return it to?
The post office. So the post office saying,
So you have to write on it.
Write
no
on it.
longer here.
either hand deliver it to the post office or write on it, no longer lives at this address.
Okay.
And it goes back to the county.
Just for the record, he has not voted.
He has not voted in 2 places, right? No, you can't do that because, we even had that issue where someone is a candidate for school board in Maplewood, South Orange, and they called us and said, we don't want to run. So that, we're about to print the ballots. We don't want to run. And we said, we can't take you off because we need a notarized letter, because what if you're someone else calling, fraudulently and saying, take this person off the ballot, and then we would look bad if we just did it based on a phone call. Yes, ma'am.
We had the same thing with our children. Our son lived in Philadelphia for a few years, and when he moved back here, he was still on.
Yes, still on the voter rolls.
Because we never returned the ballot. Isn't there some way that if someone registers somewhere else, that
Yes. Okay. So that's a perfect. You're exactly right, and that's how the process should work. So, if I live in Montclair and I move to Plainfield in Union County, when I register there and when I put my previous address, they should make a copy of that and send it to Essex saying, hey, take this person out of your system in Essex. The person is now here. So, but a lot of people will not put their previous address. So now Union County is thinking, they look at the statewide system and they're like, is this really the same person? Because they did not include their previous address, which you are supposed to include when you do a voter registration, a change of address registration. It's not supposed to be your a new registration. It's supposed to be a change of address where you're submitting your old address and your new address. But a lot of people won't do that, and you're supposed to even do that state to state. So you saw a lot of Trump officials who were complaining about other people being registered in 2 places, and it turned out a lot of them were registered 2 places because they moved to a different state. They don't put their previous state address, or if they do, that voter registration office is not doing their due diligence and sending it, making a copy and sending it in the mail to that the previous home county to take them out of the system. So there is a breakdown, absolutely. Yes.
It seems to me there should be more publicity about how to return these ballots, these registrations. Can
You're
you
right.
put something on a letter with the sample ballot to tell people what to do?
It's a good question, and that's a great solution. You're right. So I'm going to go back and discuss, put on the sample ballot if. I'm going to discuss that to see if we're able to do that. You're right. It's oh yeah, that's right. We keep mailing, and it costs more to have it delivered back. You're right. Yes.
You mentioned earlier voter suppression was possibly a bigger problem. Can you give an example of this, and perhaps any specific state or area that did have this problem in the past election?
Well, voter suppression in New Jersey, the big case that even went up to the Supreme Court and they talk about it was the 1981 gubernatorial election between Tom Kean and Jim Florio, where Tom Kean won the election by 1,700 votes statewide, and they had they were sending letters to people's houses saying, there will be, we're going to be checking ID, we're going to be, making sure that you don't have a criminal record, and there were people with armbands at polling places, standing in front, intimidating. So that case was actually brought up last year. Do you remember that during the presidential election about issues with voter suppression? That case keeps coming up. That's like a national model of intimidation from 1981. But it's happening right now with letters being sent to people in minority communities saying, your name is not in the poll books. Just trying to get them to not be interested in going out to the polls and voting, thinking it to be a hassle. Because a lot of times, if you go to your polling site and your name is not in the poll book, you have an option. You could either vote on a provisional ballot, which would then go down to the county and they would check to see, hey, is this person really a registered voter? Did we not print their name in the poll book? If it turned out that, yes, they were, and we mistakenly, not my office, different office, mistakenly did not print them on the poll book, then we would count their vote 3 days later. Or they could go down and travel down to Newark to see a judge, and a judge would say, yes, you can vote on the voting machine. They would check with voter registration. They would call voter registration. Did you make a mistake? Yes. Give them a court order to go back to the polling site and vote on the machine. That's a hassle, to have to be able to do that. So it's all about putting up hurdles and making it difficult for people. And New Jersey is very easy as far as voting because we have small polling sizes. So our average size of a polling district is about 750 people in that polling site. Other states, what they've done is they've regionalized, and that's why you see lines. You'll see lines in Ohio, Florida, all these big lines, hours they're waiting, and that's because they're going to polling places where there's 15,000 people that are registered in that one polling district, and then you have to wait online. But we don't really have lines because of our small number of people in our voting districts. So that's a benefit. And I think that's why, and what happens is what they've done by regionalizing, they've increased their vote by mail, their absentee voting, because if you wait online for 3 hours, you're not doing that again. You can say, I'm going to vote by mail or I'll vote in person. But and what I mean in person, because here's another important thing that I don't think a lot of people know. You can vote in New Jersey 45 days before the election by walking into the county clerk's office. By law, the county clerk's office has to have ballots available for voters 45 days before the election. Every day, every working day, up until election day before election day, people can walk into my office, apply for a ballot, vote on the ballot, walk 2 flights up, and hand in the ballot and vote. That's Monday. Exactly. That's Monday. So that's for any voter to be able to do that and not wait. But we have such a low, we only have about 8% of the people that vote by mail. But these other states, they have so many more people voting by mail because of their lines, because they forced it. So a lot of people don't vote by mail because they're thinking, it's going to take 2 minutes to walk in a voting booth and
solve all these problems. Everyone votes by mail.
Yeah, like Oregon, Washington. Yeah. Right. They send ballots to every registered voter. And then whatever they get back, they actually have post office boxes on the corners for just the mail-in ballots. Yes.
I have a question. Over the last couple of campaigns, I've done a lot of calling, campaign calling and working the phones. And I'll hear from people mostly when I'm calling into places like Newark. I don't know where my polling place is. I think they move it. I just moved into this neighborhood. And so what was frustrating, because I couldn't answer those questions, I say, are you coming out to vote? And they'll say, I don't know where to go. And I'm just wondering, what's the educational campaign? What's the communication on really letting people know where to go?
There's 2 ways. It's on the ballot, number one.
I know, but
also it's online. So there's, find my polling location NJ. You could Google that. It's on the Secretary of State's website. It should be on the League of Women Voters, where you just put in your address and it tells you the polling site and address.
What about someone who is in Newark and changes buildings? It may So if you move during a year, do you need to go re-register, or do you have to find out? Because you could move across the street and you're in a different polling location, right?
Yes.
I mean, because that, in some crazy way, that's suppression too. You know, because boom, you know, I'm in a different place and I don't know where the new location is. I don't know how we get that kind of communication out.
I know what you're saying. So you're saying that person who moved would not get a sample ballot in the mail.
And it's you know, there are large transition, sorry, you know, communities where people are transitory. They're not staying in the same apartment year on year or 30 years in the same house. And it's hard to get that population to the polls to really vote, was my experience in making the phone calls.
This is televised. That's why we need to use the microphone.
Did you have a question? Yes, Bill.
Making voting so much better. I'm Bill Esmond, a member of the league, and a couple quick questions. I was last year. Cynthia Rogers said, "Let's go registered voters," and we went to Bloomfield College. Hundreds, maybe 100 plus. Many registered as 467 Franklin Avenue, Bloomfield, because they were dorm residents. What are the rules on dorm applicability if you're going to be living there most of the year?
Yeah, well, you can.
It was simpler for them because they might not be going home on election day era.
Right. What the court has said is you can register to vote where you lay your head. So we have a lot of people who live in Florida and New Jersey, that type of thing, and they, you know, might spend 6 months. But you can be away at college, and you can register. You just can't vote in two places.
Right.
But you can register at your dorm room. The big issue, real quick, a big issue at Montclair State University. The president of Montclair State University wanted to register, put a big push on registering her students. And she wanted to have more influence, more political influence. She wanted to register them all, because the problem is the campus is Montclair, Clifton, West Patterson, Little Falls. It's got different towns, 3 towns. And what she wanted to do, and she took it to the Secretary of State and the Attorney General's office, she wanted to register them all at one normal avenue, which is the entrance to Montclair State, that address, which would be Montclair, and then they'd have more influence with thousands of voters in Montclair. And they ruled that you can't do that. It's where they lie their head. If they're sleeping in Little Falls in a dorm, they can't be registered at one normal Ave in Montclair. And you know, it makes sense, but I understand her trying to fight for that influence, thinking that, you know, as a whole, Montclair State, you know, can be registered at one address. She thought that, but it wasn't ruled that way. But yes, sir.
As a League of Women Voters member who's proud to wear democracy is not a spectator sport, I say be careful what you wish for. I don't like couch potatoes sitting and saying, I'm voting today. I like it in November. I like it's cold, and I like it means you have to get up, believe, and go out and vote. I do support the vote by mail. How do you, with all the increases you've seen in that, and there are more to come, get these things removed from the book almost a day or two before so that their name's not in the book to prevent a double vote?
Right.
Because how would it be caught if it was a vote by mail? I'm not looking at fraud. I'll tell you that in a second. I'm talking about how do you make the book smooth? Because some people, seniors sometimes, I'm one, forget they voted by mail, that their daughter helped them out with it. Now they go into the poll, and I've watched them get disgruntled because your name's not in the book. So you must run a person.
So we're on the same system, the county clerk's office, the voter registration office, and when someone registers or applies for a vote by mail, they are flagged in the system immediately when we issue a ballot, when we print out a label. So when we print out a label for this voter and prepare the ballot, they are immediately flagged in the system. So when those poll books get printed, that name will have on it vote by mail voter. So now, if that person does not end up voting by mail, let's say it gets lost in the mail, they mistakenly threw it out, they didn't fill it out, they could go to the polls and vote on a provisional ballot, because their name, they won't allow them, by that saying in the book, vote by mail voter, it will not allow them to vote on the voting machine, because they vote on a provisional ballot, the provisional ballot comes back down to the county, we verify that the person in fact did not vote by mail, and then the provisional ballot counts as a vote, like as any other vote, and gets registered into the tally.
Just the last one. Sure. In order for me to go up to the ballot and vote in New Jersey and the towns I'm familiar with, and for 35 years of doing this stuff, I'd have to open that book, and I'm going to vote that extra vote. You know, multiple voting. I heard it from a candidate in Allentown and then in Sandusky, Ohio, Youngstown, saying, and they come multiple times. Good. I said, let's say it's happening. I have to be the best forger in the world who instantaneously looks at a book and matches that signature. I have to know that person didn't vote today and won't vote today. I have to also know that a poll worker doesn't recognize me the third time and have to change my outfit because it's November.
Right.
So every once in a while, look at the way the thing is. There's little twerks that we got to do, tweaks we got to do. But what scares me most is this national effort of taking every state's all ballots instead of taking sample tests of, let's take old machines in a rural district, brand new machines in a rural district, inner city, this, that, and the other, mix them. And you sample a couple 100,000 ballots. You don't turn New Jersey and other states upside down looking for every single ballot. I worked for a utility company, the one that they used to not like, Mayor, in the 90s. We're better now with you. And you know what I mean. And when someone wrong with bills, I would sample 15 of these, 20 of them, 30 of these, 40. We didn't sample 2,300,000 customers, and that's what they're doing nationwide, and that is a business failure as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
I have a question about the percentage of people that vote. Judging by what was said in this room, I know that our daughter registered is votes in North Carolina, and she's still, we didn't know we had to send the ballot back. So I would imagine that the percentage of voters that vote are actually greater.
Yes.
Because so many children are still in their parents' address even though they're not voting there.
Yeah, it is. It's so true that there's the numbers are inflated. The voter rolls are inflated with people who are not real. They're not able to vote. So, when we had 70%, 70 plus, I think it was 73% in the 2008 presidential election, that probably turned out to 85% if you talked about real voters. So I agree, it's not as clear, and people are not seeing true, there's not a reality there in percentage to real voters. And that's a shame, because I think that also will cause even more apathy to think, oh, if the average is 35%, in New Jersey, when it really probably is over 50% in reality. So that's important.
You've mentioned a couple of things where just like this last instance where the voters are not being taken off the rolls. They've moved away and nobody knew to send in the thing. The new town is not informing the prior town, and the Social Security is maybe or maybe not really updating people when the polling when the person is deceased. Is there any activity underway in any of these three circumstances to fix the problem?
Yeah. There has been meetings concerning that with the Secretary of State's office, the Division of Elections, making sure that this is communicated to the. Now, I agree with you. Brought up that situation about maybe the sample ballots should state that, which is very important. But as far as the Social Security and the DMV and the agencies not sending a copy of the registration when they get someone who moved to their county or their state to request that the person be taken out of their registration count, registration. It's there's meetings happening all the time, and it's just, people not following through. I'll give you, I was just thinking about the 2008 presidential election when we moved our primary. If you remember this, we moved our presidential primary to February because we wanted to be a player, right? We wanted to, in national politics, where we can get involved in a campaign and maybe have some people be involved in a cabinet of a new president. And it was a one-time deal. And what was interesting is we had to start preparing ballots at Christmas time for the February. What's that? Well, I'll go even further. So we're preparing the ballots. All of a sudden, people start dropping out of the Democratic side and the Republican side of the primary. They're running out of money, and I think you said John Edwards dropped out. There were Republicans who dropped out, and what started to happen was people started calling saying, "Hey, you don't have early voting in New Jersey. Your vote by mails, you don't open them till Election Day, so the voting, the tallying is not till Election Day, right? So your vote does not count till Election Day. So technically, if you were to pass away 2 weeks before Election Day, your vote technically shouldn't count because they count votes on Election Day. We do not have early voting like a Florida, right? So what happened is people are calling saying, hey, I voted for John Edwards, and he's no longer a candidate. I want to change my vote. I want to come back in and change my vote because it's a wasted vote, and you're not counting the votes till Election Day. They had a point, and I said, yes, you're right. I said, if you come in, we will nullify your first vote. You can vote again, and then New Jersey State Legislature made a law saying you can't do that. You can't, once you make a vote, you can't change it. But I thought they had a reasonable argument, and them coming in person and nullifying their first vote and voting for someone who actually was running, for
What would be the process for moving the Jersey primary date from an irrelevant date like June to trying to do something early in the year?
The legislature. I mean, it was done by Senator Cody, who did it, passed a bill.
That was just the one time.
The one time.
But the legislature could then say, we want to be an early state like New Hampshire.
Yes.
Considering we have a lot more people than New Hampshire, it might be an interesting concept, wouldn't it? But,
right.
It just feels like by the time it comes around.
Yeah. I found this interesting also, that in the February presidential election, we still had, obviously, our regular June primary election. So we just had it for the presidential. We maintained our June primary election. The turnout was incredible because it was very competitive. I mean, you had Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, right? You had like John McCain and Mitt Romney. Like you had big deal. So very competitive. What was interesting was two things were interesting. Number one, the amount of people that voted. Let's say it was 250,000 voters. And in June, it went right back to the standard 40,000. It was amazing that no one who, doesn't normally vote in the primary and voted in the presidential primary in February did not translate into voting in the June primary. That was incredible that happened. I thought that, and it goes to the point that a lot of people think that their vote mostly counts with presidential elections, not realizing that there's just so much on the ballot. Like I said, local, county, state ballot questions. I know Montclair doesn't have, the elected school board, but, 19 of the 21 towns, actually Orange on the ballot has putting up if they should have, elected school board members in Orange this November. But that's a whole nother thing. So you get all these decisions on the ballot, but people like to just vote on president for the most part. And I don't think it has as much impact as, I'm not going to take away from it because you can see it happening right now. It's a worldwide impact. But, day-to-day services and, policies on the county level and the state level, very impactful. Yes.
If you know statistics, all of these anomalies are very small numbers in the total picture. People that do something wrong, they're in the wrong address. It's so minuscule of the millions of people that vote.
Right. I know. I agree.
Returning to the issue of voter fraud or voter suppression, you mentioned a lot of state computer systems and county computer systems that do the totaling or the verifying of voters. Are the people who design these systems and program them state employees, or are these systems contracted out, and are the people who design and program these systems vetted, and are these systems audited or inspected for possible bugs, intentional or accidental?
Very good question. Yes, so each county is different. In Essex, we do have a company along with county employees at our warehouse that program the machines and then run them through tests before election. We actually have a week before the election where all the candidates receive a letter saying we are going to test. You can come in and verify the machines and go around to each voting machines in your said district for all of the candidates throughout the county, where you see them voting, testing the machine, that the machine is working for that programmed candidate and it's registering a vote for that programmed candidate. So it happens before every election that each machine gets tested to verify that it's programmed correctly.
Following up, what about the systems that verify that voters are on the that are registered properly or have been removed from the rolls properly, the systems that check one name against another database and so forth? Are these systems audited and are the programmers vetted?
Good question. So you're talking about voter registration system. So it came into effect in 2009, where we used to have county-wide voter registration systems, and then it went to a statewide system where the state manages, the Division of Elections under the Secretary of State and the Attorney General's office manages the statewide system. And then the county office, which is the Commissioner of Registration, their office is able to put people in the system or take people out of the system. The state is not able to. They just monitor it for security purposes, which I just mentioned to you before, that now this Homeland Security is going to monitor them as far as securing the system. But it's the county office that maintains the system as far as changes made to the voter registration system. The Attorney General's Office, Division of Elections, they just oversee it, but they're not able to make any changes to the system. Yes. You need the mic.
I want to go back to your comment about Ohio having, I guess you said something like district or regional.
Regional.
And my question earlier about a place like Newark, where people move rather frequently, at least some of the population we see, and so the mail system doesn't work for them. And so they don't always know where their polling place. And I guess my question is about, what if there was a way for maybe with iPads and signing the iPad, so everybody had, every poll worker has everybody's name, so that if I moved to Newark and I registered, could go into any school, they would find my name and I could vote. So I don't have to figure out which one place and where it is, because I think that's a real challenge for people who are homeless, for people who move in and out of apartments, to say, you go vote in the school 3 blocks from your house.
Right.
And so why can't we do that?
Well, I'll tell you, that's coming, and that's the Democracy Act also for next year. Well, here's what's part of that is there's going to be electronic poll books, just like you said, electronic poll books that will encompass the whole county. So that early voting, the 15 days before Election Day, where each day you can go in to seven different locations throughout the county. So we're a Class A county where, because of the number of registered voters, we can have 7 different polling places open for each of the 15 days before Election Day, and there'll be county polling places. Like there'll probably be 2 in Newark, and then the 5 others throughout the county where you could just walk into, you could be from South Orange and walk into a polling place right here in Montclair Town Hall, and it'll be an electronic polling book, it'll be paper ballot stored there. So let's say there's, 32 different ballots. They'll give you your ballot for your, town, and you'll vote on that, and it'll be counted, and that's how it'll work. But that's how it's working in other states. I'm telling you, we're pretty far behind as far as technology goes, and ballot access for people and making it easier. So I'm telling you, next year it will move rapidly. All of these changes and improvements to access to voting. That was a good point.
With that system, what would happen if somebody has a common name?
Well, it would just be like anything else. It would be, you'd look up the person's name and address. It would all be right there. They'd walk in and say, I live in South Orange. Here's my address, here's my name. And it would come up and it would match. They'd most likely even have the date of birth in there. It would match as well as it's possible to match, just as we do for vote by mail applications. The person fills out their name, address, date of birth, and we match the person. Yes, ma'am.
First, I want to say that I work at the polls, and there have been several instances, and they're not infrequent, where people have registered at motor vehicle agencies and it has not gone through. So I urge you to do what you can to improve the coordination.
Another issue, as you spoke about, coordination with state and county offices, and that's what's supposed to happen. They're supposed to, in a timely, and we get that especially in presidential elections, where the DMV, people are registering because they're updating their driver's license, they're changing their address, they have the access to change their address on a voter registration form, and then the DMV is supposed to forward it to the county that they're registering to vote, and they're not doing it in a timely fashion. So then the person shows up on election day and it never got to the county to put in the system.
So
it's
give them a provisional.
Right, give them a provisional.
And is there any, I thought that there was not, is there any coordination with other states, such as, I know some people who have mixed marriages. One of the couple lives in New Jersey, the other of the couple lives in Florida, and they go back and forth. Is there any way to coordinate with other states to make sure that those two people vote either in New Jersey or in Florida and can't do a vote by mail in the one that they're not registered for?
Yeah, there is no coordination, and I'll say there was also issues of people brought up about whether or not college students, were registering in a new state.
Where would it be preferable for them to register? Where their original residence is or their college residence?
They could. What do you mean? Where would it be? Wherever they want to register. You could only vote in one location per election, and you need to be a registered voter. Now, like I said, some people are registered in multiple locations, but only vote. They only vote in one location. People talk about whether or not college students might vote at their dorm room and also do a vote by mail back home. But there is no coordination state to state.
Okay. And no, I'm trying to read my notes. Oh, when do you, people have said, I'm not going to vote provisional and I'm not going to vote by mail because you never count them until after Election Day anyway, and the results are already decided, so it's irrelevant. So when do you count those votes?
We count those votes. If Election Day is on a Tuesday, we count the votes on Friday. 3 days after they're verified that they are legitimate registered voters, and we tally those votes into the overall count. I will tell you that provisional ballots have changed the outcomes of multiple elections in Essex County. We have elections that come within 10 votes, and we have 50 provisional ballots, and it sways the election. And we count every vote in New Jersey. Every vote gets counted, and it matters. It counts just the same. A provisional ballot counts exactly the same as someone voting on the voting machine. And I've seen it many times where it's overturned an election or changed the outcome of an election with provisional ballots. So very important. Thank you.
But the number 22807 is a number I will never forget. That was the June 94 primary. Tom Gibbons and Cardo Cooper.
Yes.
That took 6 months.
That election in 1994, that election ended in a tie on election night. And a tie. Think about county, the whole county. Yeah, Essex County. A tie. And it went through the court system, and Cardo Cooper ended up winning by 17 votes.
But many county people have decided to go for the Republicans because they didn't want to be on the wrong side of either Democrat.
So my understanding is New Jersey doesn't have some of the state laws that disenfranchise people, like felons being barred from voting after serving a sentence. Why can't New Jersey just confer registration on every citizen who attains the age of 18 in the state, instead of making people proactively seek to become an eligible voter, simply confer that right on them? What's the difficulty there?
I agree with you. I agree. When you're 18, you should be automatically put on the polls, registered to vote. It's, like you said, part of, you're becoming an active voter, and it shouldn't be where you have to, you should just be able to go to vote and not have to go through a process of registering to vote. As long as you're have a address and a name and you're 18 years of age. I mean, and that's what they say. You need to be 18, a U.S. citizen, and you have to actually. Here's another interesting part. You have to be a resident of a state 30 days before you're able to vote in that state, and that's all part of the presidential, where they don't want someone going over to Pennsylvania a week before the election and voting in the presidential. They want you to be established in that state for 30 days before. But I agree, you should be automatically registered to vote at 18 and be a part of the process that way. Yes.
So I don't know how you would actually proactively register every 18 years. However, I do remember that my son got a draft card, which was interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know how he got a draft card.
Social Security. Right?
Social Security. Mm-hmm. Now, my daughter didn't get one, which is another thing. But I guess if you use that same Social Security information, you legitimately could. Somebody turns 18, if they have a Social Security number, you get a draft card and you get voter registration.
Yes.
You could do that nationally, couldn't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That could be immediately happen right on your 18th birthday. Here's a card. You're registered to vote.
Because they do send you a draft card.
Right, yeah.
You can get drafted, but you can't vote.
That's true. You had something else you talked about. Just I thought there was another question before that. You talked about immediately being registered at 18, but was there something else that you had?
Disenfranchisement. I was wondering if I was missing anything in New Jersey. Do we disenfranchise voters for any purpose?
That's exactly what it was. So we do disenfranchise voters who are paying their debt to society through a felony. So their time of incarceration, probation or parole. And then here's another interesting part that talks about disenfranchisement. So when you are sentenced with a felony, you come off the voter rolls, right? They'll do that. They take you right off. But when you complete your debt, they do not put you back on. You have to go and re-register. State of Vermont and Maine, they don't disenfranchise ever a voter. States in the South, Texas, Virginia, Florida, it's very difficult to go back on. In some instances, you need the governor to sign you back onto the rolls specifically. I mean, it's pretty incredible, the hurdles to get back on. I know Terry McAuliffe in Virginia made a sweeping declaration that, right back on the rolls who, needed clemency from the governor to vote again after they've paid their debt to society. So there's multiple instances and standards throughout the country. Yes.
One last, I hope. There are some people who either are homeless without an address, or some people who are who have restraining orders, or are in domestic violence shelters where they cannot have their addresses known. What do we do about them?
Yeah, very, very difficult. With the homeless person, you could give a shelter address. You could give, we actually have people registered at the Hall of Records because of circumstances like that, a government building, because of issues with domestic violence. But the system needs an address. But it doesn't have to be, in the case of a domestic violence, it doesn't have to be their home address. So that's a protection afforded. But we need a physical address in the system.
Thank you. So could it be a social service agency?
Yes.
Perfect.
Social service agency, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
But on that same thought, you need an address, but don't you need proof of that address, like a utility bill or something that has that name and address on in New Jersey?
Well, because of the circumstances, like if you're a victim of domestic violence, part of the process is they know you'll use a P.O. box. So that's what happens. A lot of domestic violence, they use a P.O. box as an address in the system, but then have a like the Hall of Records or some other, but their P.O. box serves as their address. Yeah, the P.O. box. Yeah, that's right. So that's what they'll use, the P.O. box.
You've given us a lot of information today to a relatively small segment of the population. You have access to major newspapers, magazines, and local newspapers. And I would urge that you would pick the important things and have a story, a column, so a lot of people will get this information. I think that's very important, and I would urge you to do that.
Thank you. I will. I do, but I should do more. You're right. Thank you.
A footnote to what you said earlier about the history of when people could vote. I bet most of you don't know that in New Jersey, when New Jersey became a state, women had the vote. But then they saw that in other states, women did not have the vote, so they took it away.
Mm-hmm. Incredible. That's right. Coming up on 100 years. Right? Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.